Hello folks, this is another video from Microsoft Excel. This time it's create a comparative bar chart. Now the scenario that I've chosen for this is coming from the Rowan Garden Centre. What they do at the Rowan Garden Centre is they buy all their plants and their flowers in on January. Then they sell from February through to June, and then they restock based on their stock figures for June. We could present the information as a table as we see here, and it is very easy to read. However, there will be times when you want to display that as a visual display, as a bar chart. So we're going to now create the bar chart to be presented. When you're creating your bar chart, you must know the columns that you need to highlight. And in this case, the columns we're going to highlight is the name of the plants that sit in column A. It's going to be the January figures that sit in column D, and it's also going to be the June figures that sit in column I. So when you highlight, you must make sure that you take in the header. So if you click where it says common name, that cell reference is A3, keeping that mouse button held down, if you drag down till you get to the quarter line, which is in A18. Now you would know that we have to select non-adjacent columns, and to do that we need to hold down the control key on the keyboard. So if I hold down the control key, I'm now ready to select the second column. This time it's going to come from column D, and again I'm going to click where it says January because that's my column heading and that sits in D3. So I'm then going to slide from D3 right down to D18, which will select all the figures that sit in the column D. I'm now ready to move on to my final column. That column is our June figures. So I'm going to click into I3, which is the heading for June, and I'm going to slide down to 12, which is the end of that range, and it brings in the price for June for the quarter line plant. I then let go of my control key, and that brings in the three columns that I want to display in my comparative bar chart. The common name, the January stock figures, and the June stock figures. So now I've got my data selection. I now need to move into creating the chart itself. So I click into the Insert tab. When I click into the Insert tab, it changes the ribbon to match what I want to do. And what I want to do is here in the Charts section, and the chart that I want to create is a 2D column chart. So I'm going to select just the first one. Now what that does is bring in a little preview into the spreadsheet, which is called Stock Jan to June, that I'm using at the moment. But I would like to see that that chart sits in a place of its own. Now there are two ways to do that. The easiest way to do it is to take your mouse, and remember I'm still in the Insert tab, slide along the ribbon until you come to Move Chart. And when I click into Move Chart, it's going to come up with a dialog box where I can tell Microsoft Excel where to place this chart and also to give it a name. So I want that to be in a new sheet all of its own. Now it comes up with the chart. That doesn't mean anything. So basically what I'm now going to call this is chart for stock. And I click OK. You will automatically see that that small chart has now been moved to a page all of its own. And it also has increased in the size to fill that whole page. So now we've created our chart. The next thing we need to move on to is being able to label that chart. At the moment, we could read and understand what's going on, but remember, you're putting this together for your level 2 essential skills. So therefore, we need a lot more information going on and a lot more labeling. I'm going to click outside to deselect. Now, what you will see is that we have our chart. But once I click into the chart area itself, it comes up and lets me know that I'm in my chart tools. Very similar to if you were using an image. Chart tools will only appear if your chart is selected. And we go, excuse me, to the design option. The design option then would be here to add the chart element. Now what I want to do is I want to label this so that it is very clear the information that's going on. If I click down, you can see I've got axes, axis title, and our chart title. Now our chart title at the moment is above the chart, and that's exactly where I want it to be. So what I want to do is, instead of calling it chart title, I would like to give it a proper name. Okay, and that proper name is going to be half year stock. I take my mouse and I click outside to deselect. You will now see that the chart has a proper title. That title must describe the content. It's very similar to when we create columns. They must describe what sits inside those columns. And also if you name a file, it must describe the contents of the file. This is no different. From what we can see, we have a scale and we have names that run across the bottom. So I'm now going to name those and give those a label. Make sure my chart is selected so I can bring in those chart tools and go to the Add Chart element. So this time if I slide down to Axes Titles. Primary horizontal is our x-axis that sits across the bottom. And what I want to call this then is plant name. Because sitting above that would be all the names of the plants that you would find inside the garden centre. Now I need my y-axis, which is the scale. So I click back into Add Chart Element and I slide down to Axis Titles. This time I'm going to go to Primary Vertical. That will bring in my y-axis. Now what I want to name my y-axis is stock number. In other words, the number of plants that are in stock at that time, which is January and June. So now I have brought in some labels which will help explain the chart. The title, y-axis, and x-axis. We could go ahead and present this, however, we would like to add a little more detail. It is easy to read, for example, this is 500, but it's very difficult to read what's coming in the June figures. Is it 310? Is it 315? So what we would like to do now is to bring in the data values that came from the spreadsheet itself. Again, make sure that you have your spreadsheet selected to bring in your chart tools and make sure that you're in design. From there, we're going to go to Add Chart Element. This time I'm sliding right down till we get to Data Table. When I get to Data Table, I have a few options. The one that I'm going to choose is the data table with the legend keys. And if you take a look at the screen, you can see the values have now been popped on. And more importantly, you can see the January and the June has also come in as well as the legend. There is a second legend, which is our default legend, which sits at the bottom. I'm going to get rid of the legend from the bottom. So we need to click into it. It's a flexible piece of text. Sorry, my mouse is moving there. And I need to delete that. I would advise that you do bring in your legend into your data table. The reason for that is your eye will be focused here to be read across. And if you had one that sits outside your data table, your eye needs to go to two different places. Finally, what I want to do is I want to change the color of the bars. Now the Rowan Garden Centre, you could see that what they were displaying was brown and green in their logo. So I'm going to continue with that theme. So this time, instead of the design, I'm going to go to Format. Format changes the ribbon and brings me in the information that I need, the information that I can use. So I'm going to click once onto the blue bar, and you will notice that that selects every single blue bar that we have. So in other words, our January figures have now been selected. I'm going to go to my shape fill, and we've used this before when we have been creating our logos. And I'm going to slide down and I'm going to choose green. Then I'm going to click into the next color of the bars. Okay. And I'm lucky because I have my brown here. So I'm going to slide down and I'm going to click into the brown. Now, once I click into the brown, you can see really they're not distinct. What I'm looking for is distinct bars, especially if you were going to print this out. So the shade of brown that I've chosen really wouldn't suit. I need something that's darker. Okay, and if I choose something that's darker, I can now see that these two bars are distinct. So I've now brought in my information, which is my data set. I have now labeled what I'm looking for. I have now brought in the values so you can check the size of the bars. The last thing I need to do is to make sure that this is readable. So I'm going to start first of all with the title and then with our X and our Y label. So I'm going to click into the title to get it selected, and this time I'm going to go to the Home tab. Now we are very familiar with changing the font. I'm going to choose Trusty Arial, and this time I'm going to bring that to 24 point. So now we have really created a title that stands out, very similar to what we did in our newsletters. I'm going to highlight both the stock number, hold down my Shift key, and bring in, Control key. Sorry, it's not playing ball with me, so I'll just do one at a time. So I then go to Arial, and I'm going to choose 14, just to make it that little bit bigger. So I'm going to go to Arial, and I'm going to go to 14. The last thing that I would want to do is take a look at where we have our labels, okay? So these are known as category names. And you can see, yes, I can read everything across until I come to this one. And what is happening there is that the text has been hyphenated and the N has been slipped down onto the second row. So if I click in to get that highlighted, so my table is highlighted because I can see the dots that go around it, very similar as if I placed in an object or if I placed in an image. And now I'm going to come back up, I'm going to keep it as Calibri, but I'm going to shrink it down to 8 points. And when I shrink down the size of the text, you will now notice that every single one of my category names has now been put in place. That will then end our spreadsheet. So first of all, what we need to do, take in your data set, create the column chart that you're looking for, put in your labels so you can identify it, bring in your data table, and finally do your formatting. Change the color of your bars and keep the theme that you have running through your club, and also make sure that you can read all of the text without hyphenation. This then ends this section on our comparative bar chart. Thank you.